One of the last approaches we're going to talk about is the participative approach. The participative approach to decision making gives power to people who are affected by the decision on how the decision is made. Now, that could either be that we ask them for their perception, their perspectives. They are able to provide information to us, or we actually give them power to make those decisions. There's some questions about how this works. So one way is that we can ask employees of the organization to make decisions about the organization. We could ask the clients about how their perception of the organization is or what they would change. We could ask taxpayers, everybody, how to make those decisions. Do we give over all the choice about agency behavior to the voting public? So who gets to participate in these decisions and how does that matter? Well, one way is that we can hold public forums and ask people for feedback about what's going on with like a public park. We, in California, give everybody under the Brown Act 3 minutes to talk in every public meeting about anything that's on the agenda. So you can have 3 minutes and talk about, how the budget's going, or if they're reviewing the budget, or, some city council decision about approving a development. Everybody who wants to in the city can show up, and if it's on the agenda, they can talk for 3 minutes. Okay, that's one way they can participate. The other is that we might hold citizen advisory committees. And those citizen advisory committees, there was one in Anaheim that looked at voting and how they could redo the voting structure inside the city. That citizen commission actually had power to recommend to the city council what to do. That they had power to call in individuals to testify, to provide expert witness. They had budget power to get as much information as they wanted to make this decision. They wrote a report and they sent it off to the city council. The city council then can make decisions about what to do. Some of the things that happen in a participative type approach is that we often get NIMBYism, not in my backyard. So if we give people the power to make decisions for government, then they often want to push away the bad consequences from their neighborhood and bring in all the good benefits. So there's some pressures to keep government intrusion out of their lives and push it off onto, unfortunately, somebody else in somebody else's backyard. We're talking about locating a waste incinerator, locating low-income housing for homeless people. Those are really perceived of as bad things to bring into your community. And so if your community is given an option to decide where those people, where those housing units are going to be built, where that waste incinerator is going to be, they're going to say, not here. And they'll find gazillions of ways to not allow that thing to show up. They'll provide all sorts of information. They'll talk about community impacts. And the people who show up at the meeting end up pushing those bad consequence type policies to areas where the people didn't show up. People didn't show up to the meeting from those areas. So this is a significant problem when we talk about who shows up to meetings, who gets to participate. And it's not that we don't allow everybody, but there are just some structural problems inside of our society that prevent some people from showing up. The people who typically show up are retired, old people, engaged in the community for a long period of time. Young people don't tend to show up because they either don't understand the process or they're busy in their careers. Speaking of that, higher income people often have the ability to take off time from work to show up to meetings. Lower income people often don't have that time to take off to talk about why they shouldn't have a waste incinerator in their area. So we have some of these problems that end up creating disproportionately bad outcomes for low socioeconomic status individuals, people who are work second, third shift, maybe work 2 or 3 jobs, lower income, younger people, and the more affluent, older communities tend to have the better benefits, and they push off the bad consequences because they participate. So the participative approach encourages individuals to engage in the process, but it has some problems. For example, we get all sorts of information from the people who are affected by the decisions. Sometimes that's too much. Sometimes we don't know if that information is good or bad. And maybe that information isn't right. It might be their experience, but how do we weigh that information if we allow everybody to participate equally? Do we allow just a small group of people to participate? Should we choose who that is? Or should we let everybody participate? Well, if we let everybody participate, the decision-making process is going to be very slow. And it's going to be hard to make good, rational, reasonable decisions because it's going to take a lot of time to filter through all this information. Do we establish a committee that has decision-making powers? Do we just hold informal meetings? And then there's some bigger questions like, should we actually give formal decision-making power to the people who are affected by the decisions? Think about this. We have, in terms of farming, we have committees that are comprised of dairy farmers who help set the price for milk in the U.S. The government agrees to buy milk for national security reasons, but also for low-income individuals. So how much should we get? How much should we pay for milk? Well, we've essentially turned over that decision to dairy farmers. They have a council. They review their own costs and their expenditures, how much it costs to be a farmer, the ups and downs of being a dairy farmer and how much milk actually costs to produce. And then they tell us how much we're going to buy that milk from them for. That seems a little odd because they could continue to jack up that price all day long. Or maybe they couldn't. It's really unclear how that actually works. But we need a stable supply of milk because in order to get milk, we have to impregnate cows, then we have to wean their babies, and then we have to continue to do that, and milk them for some period of time, and then they dry up, and then we have to impregnate them again and have babies. So the time horizon for dairy is really long, and we might have shifts in the market. Like health scientists might say, well, dairy is really good for you, so we now need more milk, and then it's really bad for you, so now we need less milk. And so the shifts in demand and supply go up and down. So we would have a really unstable market if we don't have sort of a baseline. Well, the baseline being established by dairy farmers might be a bad way to try and establish a price, because they have every incentive to hide information, add information, to change information, to make those decisions a little differently. It's not that dairy farmers are bad, but there's some questions about how much power we turn over to individuals to participate in the decisions that affect them. So every one of these four approaches has some real problems. There's some real uncertainty about complex issues. How do we actually solve a problem that's going to be effective? That's unclear, but we've got to make a decision. There's some real concerns about how much information we get, which agencies work together, which ones don't, how we're going to make those decisions, how we can implement those decisions. And ultimately, sometimes decision-making has to take place very, very, very quickly, and we don't have the luxury of gathering a lot of information or asking a lot of individuals. And because of that, we make decisions that are based on limited information, or based on our value system, or maybe that are unpopular politically. So those reduce the amount of legitimacy in our government decision-making. So decision-making is very, very difficult. And ultimately, we have to make decisions that weigh information against the things that we really value a lot. And so it's not that there is one best way to make decisions. There are 4 or 5 different ways to make decisions, and they all have strengths and weaknesses. They all have their own place in the system. They're based on different processes, different ways that they weigh information and values. And it is possible to identify which approaches will work best on certain problems. It might be challenging. But there are also ways to say, well, this decision-making process is just simply not going to work in some scenarios. And so we should really critically think about the way that we make decisions in government and choose an approach that would best suit the situation that's at hand.